#LSG Webinar. Okay, I've been talking for quite a lot now. That's probably quite enough. Guten Tag, Tuli, from Munich. I've been talking quite a lot. Probably time for me to step down and pass you over to the people who are actually going to take it through the next hour. Starting off with Clive Shepherd of Onlignment, who's going to be talking us through the first part of how to implement and adopt a social learning strategy. Clive, over to you.
Yeah, hi everybody, and glad I could have the opportunity to participate in what is a really interesting session today, I hope. Don talked about the intellectual framework, which of course puts me under a huge amount of pressure, but I believe that's what I am supplying today. That intellectual framework is essentially derived from the work I did, 4 or 5 years ago on the concept of the new learning architect, which I've talked about before with members of this group. The new learning architect is essentially a learning strategist and somebody who's able to integrate into one strategy all the different forms of learning that take place at work. And so what I'm going to do to help create a framework for today is to look at one of the core models from that work on the new learning architect, which, if you like, organizes different forms of learning into different categories. And then my colleagues from Saba are going to answer the challenge really is whether it is possible to find tools that actually help us to implement that strategy right across the board. But I'm going to start with a question for you, which I'd like you to answer in the text chat if you could. Question, a very simple one really. So how do people really learn at work? So over to you.
Great question, Clive. And of
thank
course,
you. Yes,
we can expect a tsunami of responses, which we've been getting. Look at that! Wow.
Well, absolutely. There's a lot of words coming up very often. There's on the job is probably the most frequent answer here. Trial and error, reflection by mistakes, by asking the guy next to you.
Yeah, a lot of stuff about talk and conversation and asking people, and also, as you say, by doing. A lot of that's coming up as well.
Yes, absolutely. And mentorship, somebody has said, it's moving too fast. By practicing, coaching, social media, squeaky bum moments, absolutely, which are ingrained on your memory forever after. Collaboration, team feedback, many, yes, as you say, Don, really such a wide range of different situations. And this is really what stimulated the work I did 4 or 5 years ago on the new learning architect, was how do we integrate all these different forms of learning into one strategy? Because if you are going to be a learning strategist, if you are going to be an architect for learning, then you can't just concentrate on the formal elements. You have to be able to integrate them all. And so what is the model that came out of the new learning architect? Well, it's a fairly straightforward one in many respects, and it starts with what none of you have mentioned really, although Nigel did say lots of great courses given by learning professionals. I've just noticed that there is of course a place, and a very important place, for formal learning, and I've categorized it there as learning to do something, but it's very much all the trimmings. In other words, you've got formal entry qualifications probably, you've got some form of syllabus, you've got formal tuition, formal content, some form of assessment, very definite objectives. I think we don't really need to spend a lot of time on that because we're all too familiar with the concept of a course. And there are still many reasons why courses are important, not just to organizations who need to know absolutely for certain in some cases who has received what training and education, who hasn't. But it's also very important to very many employees because that's the building blocks often of their CV and their path into the future. But of course, that really is only one portion of it. And if you think about the 70-20-10 model, then it would just be the 10%. I think there's another category which is slightly harder to explain. I will give you lots of examples later. But it's also about learning to do things. It's also developmental. It's also what you might call just in case, in the sense that it's looking to the future, but it's more easy does it. You can't categorize it as a course. And there's a lot of things which are very, very important fit into this category. It still is a conscious developmental effort, but it might include on-job instruction, it might include coaching and mentoring, it might include all sorts of more casual content like videos and webinars like today, conferences, magazines, books, and also, very importantly, communities of practice, which are very definitely attempts to learn for the future. Or as a guy I was interviewing this week from the Institute of Development Studies at Sussex University called it communities of passion, which I thought was a great phrase. So that's another very important category. The third category, which is becoming something that learning and development people really cannot ignore, is the whole category of on-demand learning. You're still learning to do things, if indeed it is learning at all, but this is just in time and just enough. And this is essentially what you need to know at the moment and to solve a current problem. You might say it's not learning at all, but it certainly has to form a part of the learning strategy. And then there's what all of you have been talking about as learning through trial and error, through practice, through reflection, through doing work on the job, and that's experiential. And I don't think it's possible to have a learning architecture, an overall organizational strategy, without looking at all four of these elements. Now, there's another angle to this which I'd like to explore with you, which is the fact that there are also two perspectives on these four elements.
Clive, I'm really sorry to interrupt you in your flow, which is wonderful. I just need to a technical point here. We have some people dialing in, and for some reason we have an issue with our phones that when people dial in, it's supposed to be a separate line, but they're supposed to be muted automatically. They're not. So if you are dialing in to listen to the sound of this, please mute your phone. Otherwise, we can hear you. We can hear every rustle, every aside conversation. Please, if you're dialing in, mute your phone, and we'll be able to concentrate on what Clive's saying. Clive, back to you.
Yeah, Don, I think that these four contexts can all be viewed from two perspectives, and this is a very important aspect of what we're talking about today when we talk about social learning. The top-down perspective has a motive, which is that the organization needs its employees to be able to perform if it's going to be able to fulfill its own strategy and objectives. It's an obvious thing, but you can't ignore it, that the organization has an obligation, that the managers of an organization have an obligation to ensure that the competency is in place for people to do their jobs properly. And that context of top-down learning extends across right from formal over to experiential. But I think increasingly, particularly in new types of organizations that are emerging, where perhaps people have different types of jobs which are not so much based on following set patterns and rules, but where they have to make decisions based on very much more complex situations, that the bottom-up perspective is equally as important. The bottom-up perspective is essentially the motivation is from employees themselves, because employees also want to be able to perform, if you like, from a cynical basis, because they want to keep their jobs and they want to do better in their careers, but from a more intrinsic perspective, because I think as we're learning more and more, it's within us a very important factor of our motivation, that we want to gain mastery in the various elements of our life. We want to do a great job because it's a very human thing to want to do a great job. And so regardless of what our employer wants, we have a very strong motivation for learning to happen. So we have a top-down and a bottom-up perspective operating in parallel. Now, just to put some flesh on that, if you like, because this is all rather abstract, let me just take you through some examples, and then what I want to see is whether this is possible to actually strategize for and find tools that support it. So first of all, now, these are going to go too quickly for you to be able to, for us to go through these in detail, but I just want to get you a flavor of the fact there's all sorts of formal top-down learning, from the very traditional through to much more to computer games and simulations and blended learning. But even formal learning can operate from a bottom-up perspective because employees themselves take the initiative to go on formal courses to get additional qualifications, particularly professional qualifications. So that's, I think that's all fairly easy to understand. But if we move across to the non-formal, there are some really, really important elements here. There's the obvious thing of on-job training and coaching, which is such a significant factor in most people's learning. But also, there's so many different smaller ingredients that these days enable us to keep up to date. Mini workshops, the sort of 1-hour workshop, rapid e-learning content, white papers, podcasts, webinars like this, internal conferences, online video. All of these things are playing such a huge role. And these can come from the top down in the sense that the organization can make these happen. But employees themselves can make things happen through communities of practice, continuing professional development. And we need infrastructure to support that. We need to make it possible for people to create communities of practice and for them to join with their peers in order to further their development. And so we need to be looking for means to do that. Moving across to on-demand, the employer from the top down is going to be looking to create performance support materials. Perhaps there's been a lot of success in things like online books, help desks. There's all sorts of content they're going to put out on a mobile basis, increasingly, of course, now. But there's many, many things that can happen from the bottom up. If you give people the right tools, if you give them the right infrastructure, then they can make on-demand learning happen for themselves through forums and wikis and search and all sorts of other mechanisms. Moving across to experiential, now you might say, well, how can you structure experiential learning? How can you, if you like, in any way do things within an organization which promotes experiential learning? And I think that there are, in fact, many things from the top down. We can create benchmarking mechanisms. We can actively encourage job rotation and enrichment so people are getting new experiences or bigger experiences. We can make sure that projects are reviewed, that a performance is appraised. We can use tools like action learning where we actually deliberately set about learning from our current work problems and have a policy of continuous improvement. And some things come from learners themselves, from employees themselves. And this happens often without any particular structure, that people reflect on what they've done and they reflect with others. And reflecting with others is a really important way of sharing experience. And that particularly can be case studies of projects that you've been working on. It can be just reflecting on good and bad experiences on a daily basis, which can take place through blogging. And I do think there's something organizations can help people to do to make experiential learning happen more, which is to try and make it possible for people to get alive. And what I mean is that so many of the learning experiences we have are nothing to do with our work. It's to do with all the things we do outside work, our hobbies, our family life, our community engagement that we have. All of these things provide fantastic opportunities to learn, and these can be passed back into our working lives as part of experiential learning. But you have to have the opportunity to do that, of course. So let's ask you the question again. This is the question I had when I was doing this thinking a few years ago. I was thinking, well, if I'm a learning development person, I can understand how I can put in place some of these things, but how can I create an infrastructure which would actually support all of these elements without me having to be at the center? Because it's impossible as a learning and development person to be the active catalyst for every one of these elements. In a way, we want to make sure that the infrastructure is there and then back away and let it happen. So what sort of technologies do we need, anybody, to make all these things happen?
It's a great question, Clive, and increasingly as people find themselves under pressure to do more and more, and as we know more and more about how people learn, it's clear that we simply can't be the thing at the center of everything. So how do we support them? How do we make it scalable? What technologies do we need? Interesting combination of answers coming through. Some focus on the LMS and the learning content management system.
And of course we do need some of that, don't we? Because we've still got to maintain our formal learning and the non-formal. There's a social LMS, Nick says, which I think is really what we're looking for, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got tools like Yammer, which give us Twitter-type functionality. That makes sense too. More virtual learning type environments like Moodle, and well, we got SharePoint, which is another interesting idea. Talent performance systems. There's a lot of different tools here.
A couple of negative points though. Lorna's saying we're at the point we have too many tools. People are overwhelmed, and somebody else was saying, Stuart said technology is not always the answer. It can limit us. So, Clive, what's your take on all this?
Well, I think the key thing is that there's nothing about that learning architecture which implies that technology is in any way the answer. But technology certainly does give us opportunities which lead us into more scalable solutions and more far-reaching solutions than perhaps we ever would have been able to do in other ways. But we can't rely on technology. But it would be rather nice if we could combine as many things as possible into as few tools as possible, because otherwise life just becomes incredibly complicated and disconnected. Well, I'm going to back away there and leave you with the thought that there are all these ways of working. You know, what sort of things can we do to try and provide an infrastructure to support it? And I'm going to pass on to Steve.
Actually, you're not going to pass on to Steve, Clive. You're going to pass on to Ian, but no worries.
Okay, Ian.
Doesn't matter.
We changed that yesterday, didn't we? We didn't tell Clive.
Yes, my apologies, Clive. Okay. Well, I think Clive raises some really good points, and I think the audience has been raising some really good points. Clearly, there's a fairly complex framework in which people can view and start working out how and what they apply and when they apply. And that's something that I know that Clive and his organisation have been involved a lot with, helping companies work through that maze and identifying their best strategy and the resources they need to apply. This isn't something that's facing just the learning part of a company. I went to an event, it was called HRD, which was held in April by the CIPD, and their CEO, recently appointed, Peter Cheese, he made the following statement, which is really saying that employees need to take a bigger role in their own development and the skills they need. And I don't think anybody would question that nowadays. And certainly the learning and development professionals I spoke to at that event were pointing to the fact that they could not be the sole supplier of all the learning that a company needed and that the employees needed. And I think a lot has been mentioned about social, and if you look at social, there is very strong evidence to say that the adoption of social in any company has some fairly significant improvements, whether that looks at communication or revenue, customer satisfaction, or just better access to people. And McKinsey's study, this is part of a general study that they conducted late last year and at the beginning of this year, just provides some very strong business case figures to show that the prize is pretty significant and real. So one of the things that we did, we conducted a very brief survey with the training zone, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, and we just asked how far had you embraced new working practices such as collaboration. And I think the interesting thing, and it shouldn't surprise anyone, that it's a spread between not at all, which was represented by the 28% large blue segment on the top right-hand side, to 25% who had it across the whole company. But what it said to us is that basically 75% of all the companies that were surveyed had yet to really deploy and take advantage of working practices such as collaboration using social technology. And that doesn't surprise us because it is a tricky area from what we've seen. So one of the things I'd like to ask you, and if you could again respond to in the chat function, is what obstacles have you faced in adopting such technologies? If you'd like to just respond to that in chat, that would be great. Okay, there's words like culture, good, firewalls, money, mindset. What else have we got here? Slow adoption,
Quite a consistent series of answers, actually. Firewalls coming up again and again, so is culture.
Gosh, attitude to change.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that's...
Resources.
Yep, resources.
Too much choice.
Oh, too much choice. Okay, well, I think we've got a general feel for it. Let's just point then to the second part of the research, or a piece of the research that we carried with Training Zone, which was to find out what the obstacles were. And surprisingly, cultural acceptance, that came through by many, many people. That was viewed as over 50% of the resistance. Management support, now, that hasn't come up at all, which does surprise me because that was also viewed as a significant area. And the other one was systems to support, so software. Well, if you look at those 2 or 3 areas, let's just look at cultural acceptance. I think that most people, and if you look at culture at 2 levels, culture of the individual and culture of the company, most people are probably involved in some form of social networking outside of work. So as an individual, it shouldn't come as a shock, or it shouldn't come as too big an obstacle to start adopting such processes internally within a company. If you look at management support, I can understand where some of the pushbacks have been. They've certainly been in areas of confidentiality, and are people really working, and is there a real ROI on this? Well, I think some of the McKinsey research has pointed to that, and some of the other research that's been carried out by people like PricewaterhouseCoopers or IBM certainly point to managers want their enterprises to become more social. So I think that isn't really a significant resistance point. But I do believe that the software side and the systems side is one. And certainly a lot of your responses pointed to the fact that there are probably too many tools, there's issues of integration, scalability, and that really trying to tie all this together into some cohesive solution is a bit of a challenge. And obviously, as Saba, that's one of the areas that we focus on trying to do. So what we believe is that you should be looking at a single unified solution that brings all these different elements in together, which can cover obviously the social side, but also can cover the more formal learning, and then the talent management, and all those different aspects of providing an environment where your workers can engage, thrive, and learn. So what I'd like to do is now hand over to Steve Atkins, one of our solutions consultants, and Steve's going to take you through an overview of the solution that we not only sell to the market, but we also use internally ourselves. So this is one of the things where, to use a well-known phrase, we eat our own dog food. We use the system ourselves, and Steve wants to take you through how that system can then address some of the issues and challenges that Clive's framework puts forward. Steve, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ian, and I must admit my eyes are sort of all squiggly through all the chat going on. It's amazing to see the chat when I'm watching this go on. Some fantastic points going on here. So I just wanted to show you something that we use at Saba internally, and obviously it's something that's available to the public, and it's being implemented in various places around the world. But really, from a Saba perspective, this is how I wanted to align some of the things that we do based on Clive's observations previously around the formal, the informal parts of the learning, and really how we enable this through our product, Saba People Cloud. So from a formal perspective, obviously we support learning. Those that know Saba, we're a learning company. We have all of those wonderful things in place. But really, this is me. Believe it or not, this is a picture of me. And I'm not sure how the pointers work here. But in the instance of this is me with my learning. It could be me with my skills. It could be me in meetings coming up. But we track this as part of a plan. And I can find my plan. I can see the information that's been assigned to me. I've got a couple of courses, as you can see down the bottom, and there's some progress status around that. By going into a particular course, obviously we'd expect that sort of standardized formal learning pieces. I can understand what the course is. I can see what it's about, when it's available from, etc. But by drilling into the course, I can see a bit more information about that, right? So I can see the information there. I can see the assignments. In this instance, there is a couple of courses that make up this one particular course. There's a couple of sessions. So you can see that in this instance, I completed one successfully and I completed one unsuccessfully. And it was interesting for me to understand why, and there was an issue with the content. So that goes back to if you've got good content, hopefully you've got some great learning. But this is my profile in Saba. But you can also see as we bring this information through, I can see some of my classmates, so other people that might have taken the courses around there, and I can see the number of registrations, so who's completed, who's been registered, etc. And these are my work colleagues that I work with on a day-to-day basis. You'll also notice underneath the main description piece, there's some information where we can actually rate courses. I can print certificates, I can share information, or even go to that group, which is moving into that sort of informal type of collaboration. And if I clicked in through to that particular group, again, I can see some information around who the members are. I can search that particular group for information, right? I can share information within that group. I can start conversations to see information back about the group. I can ask the community, what do we think about this? Why isn't something working in this instance? And we can see there's a remark from Lisa saying that the feedback issue is corrected, etc., but there's an issue with the content. So now I understood why there was a problem with me not passing the course correctly. In the members, you'll also see there's a little bit about online presence. So a green dot signifies that that person's actually online, because we actually have chats and other ways of communicating within the system, and we'll come on to that a bit later. So that kind of was a formal part, right? So we do that through certifications and curricula and courses and blended learning, all those wonderful things that you'd expect in the normal sort of 10% of that formal learning process. But the informal part, we touched upon that just a minute ago around the course, the groups, is if I was to go into the groups and see my groups and see all the groups that I'm a member of, again, we can see we're surfacing discussions within all of those groups. The one that I actually live in a lot is the, sorry, I was just trying to figure out how to get my, oh, here we go. The Saba Solution Consultants piece, right? That's what I work in, and these are members where we can ask questions. So by using these groups and posting questions within these communities and groups of practice, we're actually reducing a lot of the email traffic around. And basically, when we have this information within this system here, it means that we can search across all that information. And very simply from here, I could actually start a new discussion, and I can see who the members are around that. So that's a bit about the groups, but what I wanted to bring your attention to also is because some of the content and the informal pieces that we've seen some of the answers coming back around videos, right? So I just wanted to bring the point around the groups. We have workspaces, we have discussions. So how do I do this? We even have an idea engine. How do we improve something? And again, through the community, we can vote and rate ideas. We can raise issues. Something's not working properly. And again, through the community, we can see those informations and also source that information, right? So popular ideas raised at the top. These popular ones go down. We can evolve those over time. And even video channels, right? A lot of people mention YouTube as a great place to learn information. Well, within Saba, we have the ability to store those or to bring that channel into one central area. So by clicking into the video channels, you can see that we have the ability to subscribe to information. And again, I can see if there's any new video channels, and I can unsubscribe for information. I can also see any of my meeting recordings, meetings that I have recorded or been part of, which are formal recordings. So clicking through into my channel here, which is the EMEA channel, you can see that we can maybe have the featured videos. So this is the main one. This is the funny one. I'm not going to play that now. But again, other video recordings that relate to this particular channel, right? So we can play back that information whenever we need to. And more importantly, there we can actually start rating that information, right? And again, that allows us to do that sourcing of the popular information within all of these resources. Not only that, through this informal type approach, we actually have the ability to store and log all this information like that familiar intranet sort of process. So we actually use this internally. So you can see here, we have the Saba Central page. It's like a corporate intranet. And by clicking through onto a couple of things, in instance, this is product, again, I can see the useful product information that's going to help me. I can see the workspaces that are relevant to certain areas. I can see who's contributing. I can actually bookmark information and share information around this. So this is all from within the Saba People Cloud product. So moving on, addressing Clive's third part, which is more around the on-demand part. how do we get information? How do we find information? How do we sort of find it just in time? So as a user or as a person, this is what I log into in effect every day. This is a lot of starting points of our lives in terms of logging into Saba work. It kind of in conjunction with email, we do this. It's risen. The use of this particular product has risen exponentially within the organization. But you'll see familiar themes. We can see there's conversation threads, there's information. So I can see all that chatter. And if necessary, I can restrict that information just for me. I can see other information. But announcements, right? Information that's shared with me. A lot of information that is people thought I might have been interested in. And as I move down, we can even have things like sentiment analysis. I can see the groups again, suggested people that I follow. So along those familiar concepts of Facebook status updates, Twitter-like following people, finding useful people that might be contributing resources. We support that within the Saba People Cloud. One of the main things that we do when we have all this information in here is the fact that we can search across all of these resources within one centralized area, right? So all that information that's being contributed into the Saba People Cloud, we can search across, whether it be the learning catalog, blogs, conferences, discussions, you name it, files that are being shared, people, for experts, who's got the relevant expertise in the organization, who's got the skills. Let me find that particular skilled person and connect with them through this particular application. So we can do that. And as we search on something, I'm going to, in this instance, we had a gingerbread competition last year, just to show how it doesn't have to be all formal, or we can have a bit of fun in the organization. And there's a lot of things posted around that. But actually, as I searched that information, I realized that the main thing that I wanted to do was this old resource about Android gingerbread leaks that came up, right? So as we hit that search and we get the results come back to us, again, the standard things that you'd expect to do. So filter the search, make it more relevant for me. Also, if necessary, this is just anything that's got gingerbread related to it, but maybe I would like to search it by ratings, or search it by recently added, or the most shared, or the most commented piece of information relating to that search. So if we do it by rating, you can see that suddenly I've got the highest rated content at the top. And around this also, the fact that these different content pieces have different actions. So I could download a course, I could visit a blog, I could launch a link. All of those sort of things I can do. But going back to that gingerbread piece, I wanted to actually find that the one about the Android gingerbread leaks piece, and clicking through to that, I can see what's available to me. And again, I could rate this if I've read that. I could launch the link and find that information. We can do things around liking resources, right? And importantly, we can watch. So as an organization, if I had some engineering colleagues contributing the information and it's a versioned document, this is where every time that version's updated, I'll get notified that that particular one's changed. And there's other things we can do. I can share. I can bookmark this. It's something that I want to come back to. I could add to certain folders. And maybe I could flag for important, inappropriate content if necessary. And again, you can see the information that's being shared about that resource. By doing this, I'd actually pick in Ian to share with. So I want to pick up Ian, and I said, Ian, this is something that we've discussed yesterday. And as I tip through that, it gets a type ahead search to find Ian, and I can share that information with him. And Ian would then get a notification, and it would come up in his portlet shared with you. Stephen shared this with you. So a great way of sharing that information that's useful within.
Steve, can I just pitch in with a question? Because somebody said, I'm hearing a lot, Steve's talking about you could do this, you could do that, you could do something else. I mean, we've sat down and we've talked about how you actually use this yourself on a day-to-day basis internally, and everybody does. Just on a practical basis, could you come back with a precise, not precise, but an example of some time when you've used this recently in your own life and it's been useful?
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm sorry about this, but this is just to emphasize. This is what I was doing the other day, just to go through this, to prepare for this. But I use this all the time. I think I pointed to the Saba Solutions Consultant Group. That's where we post our information around product awareness, information, tips and tricks. All that information is posted there, and that's a great resource for me to go to find before I actually ask those generic questions. I will search this for information that's relevant to me. I will search this for the latest update on product releases. I will use this to connect with my groups. I will use this to communicate with my peers and colleagues. So hopefully that answered that particular question, but it's there. It supports all of those things. So I can live outside it, but it's a great resource. It draws us back into that to find this information.
Because all the information's there, that's the point, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
One follow-up question from Richard. What's the most used area of the system? And then we'll just crack on.
Yeah, I would say, well, that's a great question. I think the fact, most used, I think the fact, the communication and asking questions, so questions in groups or questions to the general audience, that's one thing. How do we do this? And I think from a product management perspective, we also encourage the use of ideas and discussions back into the organization. And there's other ways we do that. We also support this through our meetings, which we're going to come on to later. So this supports the online collaboration too. So it's kind of all there, basically. We can do it from one central area.
We're getting tight on time, so I'll shut up,
Yep.
let you get back onto it, and then we've got to squeeze in Doris as well. And then we've got a stack of Q&A coming up as well. So
yeah, so I'll be very quick getting through this. So from that, we had that formal sort of informal type ahead search to the fact we have a structured search, and again, I can drill through to the relevant areas of the application to find that information. You can see all the information available to me here through files, through bookmarks, through blogs, whatever. And the experiential part, well, going back to that sort of more formal process is how have I done something? How have I applied that logic? We have goals, and this is part of me and my plan and my goals that I'm working with. So again, it's updating information. I've done this. I've worked with these people. It could be a management goal. It could be a goal that I've assigned myself. You can see that these goals are pretty easy. They're there for me to update. And as I do that, I can update one very quickly. I can report on the progress. I can see how that information is being tracked. And again, it's easy for me or my manager to review. And as I drill into that particular team, we support all those other things that goals can be assigned to people. And part of those goals could be, connect with a particular person in the organization, do this by a certain date. You name it, hey, we support that within this particular application. And this is what I use, because we actually use MBOs within the organization as well. Going back to the sort of formal stroke informal part, we support this positive recognition of contribution, and as we drill through my profile, the impressions piece here is actually, let me get my impressions piece, is the fact that we can leave instant feedback around people. So it's not just about your job and your expectations about that, it's about your contributions. And these are my impressions that I've been given, and we got badges in there and all those sort of things. So that's sort of more social type of media interaction. I picked on Ian. I wanted to leave an impression about Ian. And you notice that I can leave a public comment, which is fantastic. Hey, Ian, you helped me on this marketing piece. I could leave a badge or select a particular badge. But more importantly, I can actually give a private feedback to Ian. And I guess from a management perspective, back to people, this is and this is a private comment, right? So again, it's that sort of informal mentoring and informal coaching that we can use for this positive experience of leaving impressions. Stepping back, and I think we're almost there, so bear with me on these click-throughs. Coming back to the main screen, I just wanted to share a couple of things with you here. Again, so sharing those resources. This is the information stream that's coming through on a daily basis as updates in time. But how do I prove information back? And I just wanted to show that actually I can contribute information, right? My conversations, my resources, my meetings. And I wanted to say, right, this is a recent project document I use. This is successful. This is the file. And then I can update that file and choose to post it wherever I need to. In this instance, it's posting it back to that Saba Solutions consultants, because that's where I work, and it could be useful for them. But I could put it anywhere and share with the general population as well. Okay, so that's contributing things I've learned back into the system. And finally, just a couple of things from my profile. We support that informal learning. So how have I done? And Clive mentioned that blogging. Well, we support blogs within here, and this is a couple of blogs that are available for me to look at. And I've picked one here, which is the Release 7 features, which is one of our technology stacks. And again, I can see some information here. People have updated this, cool examples, right? So again, remember, this is all searchable. I can go to it. I can click through to it as well. Importantly, there's a couple of things that we support. With all this interaction, there's a couple of things that really the Saba People Cloud comes out, and we have a whole bunch of reports, but we have an information analysis factor here about my influence analysis. So a couple of things that all this social information goes on. It should show me who I'm connected to in the organization, right, by location, or more importantly, by job role. And maybe as a management perspective, I could look at an employee and say, actually, you're connected with your peers, but we'd like to do something about connecting you with the wider audience. And maybe I could give you a goal or assign you a particular mentor in the organization. And just ending up on collaborations at our core as well. Through all this, right, we have that people adding and searching for information, but we support it with collaboration. So we have the fact that we have this online presence. So who's online, pick an information, I can chat with this particular person, and even from within the chat, have a meet session, which is going to launch one of our, the Saba meeting application, which is similar to the application we're using today, but it's the Saba meeting application that we have, and we can store that, and we can publish this directly back into Saba People Cloud, which is then a resource for other people to search on. So that's that. A lot of concepts. We haven't touched them all. It's been very rapid and quick fire. But if you're not ready for that, just remember this. Through it being a cloud-based application, we can turn off and on what you want, right? We limited it here. And these couple of slides here show you all the broad range of information and the things that we support within the Saba People Cloud, which actually is a great segue into what Doris is going to do, because it's not just about the software itself, it's about the successful implementation. So at that particular point, I'm going to hand over to Doris, and hopefully she can carry on this great conversation.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. It's Doris in Udivisa. Thanks very much, Steve, for this very good presentation. What I'd like to take you through very briefly and in a nutshell is basically what actually, how can we launch a social learning technology? How can we actually make sure that people are using it and people get the value out of it? There were a few comments in here in terms of how did Saba start to use this tool? How did we get trained up on it? I think Julian Studden was one of the many who asked, how did we launch it? And exactly what Steve said earlier, getting this technology in place is usually the easy part, and that's usually done very, very quickly. What's not so easy is...
Doris, sorry to interrupt. You're slightly faint. Could you either hold the phone closer to your mouth or just talk louder?
Good. Can you guys all hear me all right?
That's super. Thank you.
Perfect. I will try to talk a little bit louder. Thanks very much. So yes, as we said, the implementation of the technology is the easy part. The change management around it, not so easy sometimes. Any of those questions here will probably help you to answer whether social learning, social technologies may be something for your organization, for your company, for your group or team. Okay? But some of the things we want to look at is, what are some of those simple steps that really you need to have in place and you need to consider? And I like to call them the 4 commandments of social technology in terms of serving your audience. Although I have to say I already learned something from Nigel Payne earlier when he said we are participants, not an audience. And I think I'll definitely take this with me going forward. So how do we serve our participants, right? Our colleagues, our internal clients? The second one is definitely know your challenges. Don't go in there all enthusiastic and thinking this will be the next superstorm. It may well not be. So know the challenges and the obstacles you'll face. But equally important, if not more important, relish your opportunities. There's a lot of good stuff out there and a lot of chance for you to create value and to change relationships. And of course, set yourself up for success. Make sure that right from the beginning, you have a plan in place that allows you to be successful and that allows you to get this going. Whatever I'm talking about over the next few minutes really doesn't only pertain to Saba, it pertains to anything around social technology. Okay, so first question, what does your audience want? And I find this really nice little cartoon here. And personally being a big fan of the Peanuts and Snoopy, I thought that pretty much sums it up, what a lot of us guys in the learning technology profession actually are doing. We think that we know the answer, we think we know what the problem is, but maybe we don't. Okay? I don't want to read a book about a cat that left the room. So really there is a distinction between what's the problem versus what is the actual challenge here. And the challenge, the test that I always enforce upon myself is, if you're in a position to explain the challenge, the problem, in simple terms so that Joe Bloggs on the street would understand it, you're probably onto a winner. Okay? Make it a real and a tangible one. Make it something that you can solve, but don't make it a huge and a big problem that you have set out to solve and save the world, as it were. Another thing, and that's very important for me, is that keep the social in social technology. Collaboration is not about sharing documents. That's what Windows Explorer has been invented for. Social is all about the relationships. It's connecting with people. It's being able to work with them, to communicate, to exchange, to share. And then, of course, we're looking at some of the challenges. Okay, it's very difficult if you're missing a clear objective. What actually are you trying to solve, and can you measure it? But more importantly, once you have gone through this initial obstacle, what will happen after the first 3, 6, 12, 18 months, 36 months down the road? Another challenge is if you're already using technology, maybe it's the wrong technology, and maybe it's not just the people aren't using it because it's a cultural barrier or not enough support, maybe it just isn't the wrong technology. Again, there's a difference between does it look good versus does it do the job. Okay? Also, with whichever vendor you go, whichever supplier you select in order to help you with social technology, make sure that they are a partner, not a guerrilla fighter. You don't want to work with somebody who goes in, implements the technology, and then disappears. You want to have somebody that can actually work with you and can partner with you and helps you by sharing experiences, best practices, etc. And then, of course, confused your user group. Very important. A lot of people asked, how do you actually launch something like that in the workplace? Well, start with a selected audience. That usually works quite well. And making sure that you actually work with them and take them with you all along the way. Exactly as Nigel says, they are participants, not an audience. Okay. Let's have a quick look at the opportunities. Now, some of the things that social technology will definitely be able to help you with, if done right, is it increases speed. It increases speed across the entire organization, and the bullet points here are just examples in terms of the new hire onboarding. I manage a team of business consultants across the EMEA region, which is a virtual team. So when I hire somebody, it may well be that that person actually sits in Germany, or they may sit in Italy, or they may sit someplace entirely different. And it's difficult to get them to connect to the rest of the team. Social technology enables that, and it allows me to make sure that those guys get up to speed quickly and are able to go out and be fully performant within a very short period of time. That's also because they can quite quickly connect to the right people, and the right people isn't necessarily the people within our team. It may well be the colleagues over there in the States. No? A typical example is that we had a client here in EMEA that needed to have an absolute whiz kit on Saba Meeting. I, unfortunately, am not one of those whiz kits. However, I now, since I use Saba Social, know somebody in the States who is the right whiz kit. And Margaret, her name, was able to help us a great deal with that client. And it was done literally in a few minutes. One of the things that I personally am quite passionate about is that social technology empowers relationships at work. That's what, for me, it's all about. It really is around this virtual water cooler conversation. And somebody mentioned right at the beginning, social technology is lunch with a colleague, and I absolutely endorse that. In the absence of being able to go down the pub and have lunch with them, social technology is a good second best. And it really allows people to increase those levels of engagement, to feel more connected, not just to the company or the organization, but feel more connected to other people, to the teams you work with, to colleagues, to peers, to people in entirely different business units and departments. It makes you a little, I think it gives you a greater level of familiarity across the organization. So how do we do it? I will not spend too much time on that, but just very briefly, we definitely are the ones who want to have the arm around your shoulder. We definitely are not the guerrilla fighter that then rides off into the sunset and leaves you with the problems to deal with. We also are big fans of sharing experiences, learning from good practices, and really making sure that we benefit, the clients benefit from what we have done previously. Also, and I always emphasize that, start small. Do it in your own time, one step at a time. Okay? Don't rush, and start small. And of course, you would like to have a tried and tested implementation methodology. So while social media, social technology is quite a nice chaotic little state, and that favors serendipity, it also needs to have a little bit of structure around it, especially when you launch it. Okay? And within Saba, we go through 5 phases, very simple. We make sure that in the first one, we set you up for success. We really talk about what are your business objectives? What is it that you want to solve? Okay, you've now told me, now explain it to me again. Let's get under the skin of this problem and really make it ours and make sure that we solve it together. And then, as Steve alluded to already, what sort of functionality will help us? What can we use? We build it, and then we help you with the go live and make sure that we are there across the entire roadmap. And if you don't have a roadmap, we will help you identify a roadmap. And that pretty much is how we at Saba help our clients at the moment with social technology. But as I said, some of those points I hope you will find useful in a more general context. And the next steps really are, how will you empower relationships at work?
Yes, Doris.
Go on.
I was going to say, we've run, because we had so many speakers, we've run over the amount of time we probably have them. We could play the Medtronic, and then we'd have to go straight and wrap up. I think the Medtronic case study is a great case study, but I think it would be really useful now to go straight into some Q&A, because I've got a slew of Q&A from the audience that I think would really be worth dealing with, if that's okay with you guys. Ian, is that okay with you?
Sorry, did you say that we would miss out the Medtronic video or not?
To skip the video and do Q&A instead.
That's fine. What we can